name is Jennifer Rosado, and I'm one of the school counselors here at Nash. Welcome to Financial Aid Night. We have a wonderful presentation for you tonight. Just so you know, you don't need to feverishly take notes. The presentation and the PowerPoint and the video will be on the website probably in about a week or two after this evening. The presentation should be about an hour or so, and we'd ask that you would please save your questions for after the presentation, so you might want to jot them down as they come up tonight. Our presenter tonight, her name is Marian Hargrave. She was employed in higher education for her entire career. She worked in university admissions for over 20 years, and she departed as a director of admissions from one of the Pennsylvania state universities. She's worked for FIA for over 10 years, and she was born and raised in the northern suburb of Shaler. She's a wealth of knowledge, so please welcome Marian Hargrave.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out tonight. My bearings. As you know, the presentation will be available for your later reference, but also there was one piece of material in the back that's particularly important. That's called the Student Aid Guide, a little booklet. If you did not get that on the way in, you'll want to get that on your way out. Also a very good reference. Details everything I'm going to talk about tonight and even more. So don't hesitate. One thing that we didn't provide to you is my contact information. That's not in any of the materials, so if you'd like to copy down my name, my email address, you're welcome to get in touch with me if you have questions. You'll notice my last name does have an E on the end of it, but my email address does not, so that's not a typo. And something that I tell all families at these presentations this time of year is I am happy to talk with you and answer your questions, but I won't be able to help you in August and September when that first bill arrives. All right, that's kind of why we're here tonight, because at that point I'm kind of bound, and so will you be. So hopefully this presentation is going to give you some information on what to do at that point and how to anticipate how this financial aid process works. Now I'll have my contact information up again at the end of the presentation, so if you didn't have a chance to get it now, it'll be back up there. And of course the counselors here know how to get a hold of me as well. Okay? Let's just start off with a basic assumption is that no matter what your child may or may not do when they graduate in terms of a career, whatever their destination is, it's going to require some form of education and or training in order to enter the workforce and become gainfully employed. Sometimes that's a 2-year school, sometimes that's a 4-year school, sometimes that's a career or technical education. And tonight's presentation really refers to all of those paths to education and training. There is one exception. There are a number of schools that don't confer Title IV financial aid. That's federal financial aid. Those schools rely solely basically on loans. And they may or may not be qualified to offer the state grant. Again, those are typically the technical schools and career schools. But aside from that, tonight what I'm going to talk about relates to 2-year programs, 4-year programs, public, private, in-state, out-of-state. They're all basically the same unless I give you a little bit of a caveat. If you can see this graph, basically on the, let's see, your right-hand side, in green, what you see is that the more credentialed a person is, obviously over their lifetime, the more they're going to earn. But the other side of that graph on the red shows you also the more credentialed a person is, the less they are affected by poor economic turns and unemployment. So we can make the assumption that education and training is certainly a good investment. For a student's lifetime, it has real practical rewards. However, it's extremely expensive. And that was always the case with education, but in the last 30 years, the cost of education has outpaced just about everything else. And I don't know how well this slide translates to you in the back, but let me just sort of sum it up. Over the last 30, 35 years, food costs have increased about 250%. Housing costs have increased about 400%. Medical expenses, which we can all agree are very expensive, have increased about 600%. But tuition has increased about 1,200%. So it's really outpaced everything else that we're sort of accustomed to increasing over the years. the pace of the cost of education is kind of crazy. So that's why it's extremely important that if your student determines what they'd like to do in terms of a career, in terms of a college that they want to attend, that they're pretty certain about that path. If you're not worried about affordability, that's one thing, that's your choice as a family. But for most families, you have to determine what is affordable to you. How far will you go to place your student in the school of their choice? One thing that the government has made available in the last several years is something called a net price calculator. And the net price calculator can be found on every college's website, typically in the financial aid area. And at some schools it's difficult to find, but it must be, it's a mandate that they have this calculator on their website. Now the net price calculator is designed to help families understand what their net price is, not what the sticker price of the institution is. So when you use the net price calculators, and some are better than others, meaning some are more customizable, or customized I should say, some are more elaborate than others and provide more information. But again, it's a very good starting point for families to determine, fine, I see what the tuition, room, board, and fees of this institution is, but what will my student pay based on what kind of financial aid are they going to receive? So I encourage, if your student, particularly your senior student, has not been on the websites of the schools that they're thinking about, this is something that they want to go and take a look at, a hard look at, to be certain, are these schools within my family's realm of affordability? In terms of financial aid, just very generally, there's merit-based aid. And merit-based aid has nothing to do with your income or the financial strength of your household. Merit-based aid is intended to reward a student for a characteristic they possess. So academic excellence, athletic excellence, artistic ability, right? It could also mean that your student receives a merit award because of your heritage, your race, your religion, some particular characteristic, again, that the school wants to award to your student or reward your student for. There's also need-based aid, and that's really what I have to concentrate on the most tonight, right? Need-based aid, it does have everything to do with your income, your assets, your financial strength at home. And hopefully your student is going to get a combination of both merit and need-based aid at their school's financial aid package, or within their school's financial aid package. And for most families, you're going to need both types of aid in order to really make the cost affordable to you in terms of the bottom line. Now, financial aid comes from the federal government, comes from the state of Pennsylvania and other states, but tonight I'm basically representing Pennsylvania because FIA is the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency, and we are the state grant administrator, and we also administrate a number of other programs on behalf of the state. So there is state aid, and of course there is school and college aid, right? And school and college aid could be a combination of merit and income-based aid, right? That is conferred to your student from each of the individual schools. And I would tell you right now, if you're a senior student or parent, and by the way, students, I'm thrilled that you're here, that's great. But if you're a senior parent or student, at this very point in time, I would not eliminate a school choice because of what you believe the expense might be. Not yet, right? Because until you have those schools engage in the financial aid process with your student, you really don't know exactly what your out-of-pocket costs are going to be. So have your student pursue their possible choices. Get those schools listed on the FAFSA, which we're going to talk about. Right? Only once those schools have been listed can they communicate to your student what that bottom line, therefore out-of-pocket costs are going to be. So the schools and colleges are extremely important. The other thing I would say is if a particular type of school, let's say a Pennsylvania public school, one of the state system schools like IUP or California or Slippery Rock, if one of those schools or types of schools communicates to your student what their award would be, do not assume that all other 13 public institutions would have a similar award. That's not necessarily the case. And the same goes true with private schools. Every school packages students differently. Every school has a different source of income to provide to students, right, and a pot of money. And again, until you get those schools engaged in the process, you're not really going to know what your students' package will be. And finally, there's private sources of aid. That's basically scholarships. And any other type of outside sources that you can bring to the table are going to be extremely important. And I know that the guidance office here makes available information about scholarships. You want to look at community opportunities as well. It's going to be extremely important for you to fill in the gaps between the expense and what kind of aid your student can get. And those federal programs, the state programs, and the school's financial aid all become a realization to your student through the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA. Has anybody so far, any senior family so far started or even submitted the FAFSA this year? Okay, raise your hands because it's important that other people know they're survivors. So I can tell you, we got a good number of survivors in the house. That's great. Okay. So far, so good anyway, right? What's most important is that you understand the FAFSA website, the correct FAFSA website really is FAFSA.gov, ending in GOV for government. And mind you, it's called the free application for federal student aid, so there is no cost to completing the FAFSA. However, FAFSA.net, FAFSA.com, FAFSA.org exists as websites. And those sites, if you land on those unknowingly, when you get to the end of completing the application, you're going to be charged. Anywhere usually between $70 and $100. And that fee does nothing more for you than the FAFSA.gov website. Okay? So, a couple of things. Don't waste your time or waste your money, and make sure you go to the correct website to begin with. Now, the FAFSA for seniors could be completed as of January 1, so about 14 days ago, right? Could seniors begin to complete their FAFSA? And the FAFSA that high school seniors want to complete is the 2015-2016 FAFSA, because that's the academic year they're going to be enrolling in a school after high school. Most importantly is what you see in the middle of that slide. You should know the deadlines for the prospective schools your students are looking at. Every school has a recommended filing deadline for the FAFSA. And although the schools will accept FAFSA information after those deadlines exist to tell you that your best financial aid opportunities will be given to you if you meet their FAFSA deadlines. Right? So just as an example, for example, these are 3 schools that arbitrarily I can remember. St. Francis University has a FAFSA recommended filing deadline of February 15th. Penn State, March 1st. Slippery Rock, April 1st. And there's a bunch of schools before and in between those dates. And again, those dates are telling you for your best aid opportunities at our school, you want to get your FAFSA into us by that date. So right now, if your student your senior student is thinking about 3 different schools, your question to them is, what is the deadline for those schools? What are each of those deadlines for your schools? And as that list of school changes, again, they should make themselves aware of what those deadlines are. Extremely important. Your student can list up to 10 schools on the FAFSA. These are 10 schools that are prospective options. They don't have to be accepted to those schools yet. They don't have to have applied. These are simply a list of schools that they're thinking about. Now, having said that, I would encourage that the students list their schools in preference. If there's a clear number 1 choice and a clear number 2 choice, have them list that way on the FAFSA. Okay? And remember, you have to renew the FAFSA every year, but this first time around for prospective freshmen is a little more complicated, right? When your student renews, once they're a returning college sophomore or a returning college junior or senior, they can renew on their own. Most don't. They come back to mom and dad to do it. But it's so simple, really. The student can do it from their own campus and really not need your help. But remember, it does have to be renewed every year that you're looking either for a loan or financial aid. So this screenshot that you see is actually what FAFSA.gov looks like. And you see that there's a Start a New FAFSA button, as well as a Login button. So obviously, when you first go to the FAFSA for your senior, you're going to go where you initially begin, Start a New FAFSA. But that Login button should lead you to believe that this is not a once and done sort of process. You are probably going to go back into the application and log in for a number of reasons. One reason might be that your student has changed their mind about their school choice. That never happens, right? And so now they want to add a school or delete a school or change the order. They can do that, that's fine. You may also want to go back to correct information, and so you'll log in for that reason. You'll also log in down the road to renew the FAFSA, right? And you probably are going to go back and log in again because many of you are going to be in the position of estimating information the first time around. And so you're going to need to go back into the application, and when you have actual tax information to place in there, you're going to go back in and put your actual figures in. So we're going to talk about that estimating process, but get familiar with what the slide looks like so you have a visual recognition and you don't end up on one of those incorrect websites. So a basic principle of financial aid, parents, is that you're part of this process if your student is dependent as defined for financial aid purposes. Okay? In that case, parent information is going to be required on the FAFSA, although that doesn't mean that you're going to be obligated to your students' college costs. But the system the federal government set up in 1963 simply depends on parental information for dependent students. So don't all of you look so happy. You're going to be in it. Now, unless your child is one of these things, and I'm guessing most of your seniors are not. They're not over the age of 24, they're not a veteran, they don't already have a bachelor's degree, they don't support another dependent on their own, right? So unless a student is one of these things, they are dependent for financial aid purposes and need parental information. Now, there's a little bit of a gray area you see on the bottom of that slide. Students, in some cases, cannot provide parental information. Could be because those students have foster parents or legal guardians, or those students are living with someone other than a parent for whatever reason. Those students are in a little bit of a gray area and they can't provide parental information, but yet they don't meet that regular independent criteria, right? Those students, and I always make a general statement because I don't know who I'm talking to, and it might be that you can provide this information to someone else who may need it. Those students need to complete the FAFSA with student information only, and then they work with their college choice to mitigate the circumstance as to why they can't provide parental information. It can sometimes be not only in those situations as far as who they're living with, but there's incarcerated parents, parent abandonment, or some issue going on at home that separates the student from the parents. Otherwise, parents, let's see who draws the short straw to help your kid with the FAFSA. So if a student is living with both biological parents, right, one of those parents determines which one of them, mom or dad, or parent number one, parent number two, because it's really gender neutral. One of those parents needs to answer the FAFSA information on behalf of both parents. Okay, that's in the case of both parents living with the child. Adoptive parents are treated just like biological parents. So one parent answers on behalf of both. But in the case that a student is from a divorced or separated family, the parent whose information goes on the FAFSA is the one that the student has lived with the most in the prior 12 months. So the custodial parent. So Susie lives with dad, mom and dad are divorced. Dad's information goes on the FAFSA. No information is needed from the mother who lives in another location, right? In the case that the student is in a divorced situation or a divorced home and the parents share custody 50-50 right down the line, The next rule is that the parent who provides more support, monetary support to the student, is the one whose information goes on the FAFSA. Okay? Step parents are a part of this process as well. So the student's parents have been divorced and the student lives with, let's say, mom and mom's husband, right? Then the mother's information and the step-parent, the stepfather's information goes on the FAFSA as well. I always feel like a drill sergeant when I do this. I'm sorry, it's just rules. And there again, you see in the case of the student who has foster parents, legal guardians, or lives with someone other than a parent, they're in that gray area. They simply complete the student section of the FAFSA and then work with the school to mitigate their situation. So this is the information that you're going to need, as much of it that pertains to you, in order to complete the FAFSA. And here I just want to mention that you do not have to start and finish the FAFSA all in one sitting. In fact, tonight, if you're not familiar with the site, you just simply want to go on and go through the first couple demographic kind of pages just to see what you're in for, you can do that. Make sure anytime you go in that you save it before you close out. So what you've done is still there, right? And also, so I don't forget to tell you this, anytime you do make corrections to the FAFSA, you also want to do that as well. Sign it and save it so you don't lose any information. And that signing and saving also enacts, or activates, I should say, your corrections. And so always make sure you do that. But if you take a look at this information and you think about some of those early college filing deadlines, a lot of us, my W-2 was just made available to me, but a lot of us don't get this information until later in February. Most of us are not thinking about our taxes until later, early spring, right? So that's why most of you will be estimating your information on the FAFSA in order to meet those prospective colleges' deadlines. And that's perfectly fine. In fact, you're encouraged to do that. Most of the time, what we find is that there's very little fluctuations in income from year to year. So the schools are very comfortable using your estimated information. And then, of course, when you have your taxes completed, if you file, at that point you want to go back into the FAFSA and correct that information with accurate information. Now, there's a question on the FAFSA that says, have you filed your 2014 taxes? Will you file your 2014 taxes? Or, in some cases, there are families who, for different reasons, who don't have to file taxes. So the answer exists that, no, I don't file my taxes at all. When you answer the question that, yes, I plan to file my taxes, but I haven't yet, that's basically a cue to the schools that they're dealing with estimated information. So if you estimate, you could use 2013 tax information, right? Prior year. You could use your last pay stub and make some pretty good guesses. Okay? But that's how you estimate. Again, that's perfectly fine, as long as at some point you go back and correct that. When you do go back after your taxes have been filed, you go back into the FAFSA now to reflect accurate tax information. You're also going to use something called an IRS data retrieval tool. Most of you will. If there's a situation where parents have filed separately, that's one reason why you would not be able to use the data retrieval tool, okay, for example. But most of you will be eligible to use the data retrieval tool. And what that is an interface that comes in from the IRS and imports your tax information directly onto the FAFSA. So it corroborates your information. And that means down the road that your school, your student's school, I should say, final college choice, is not going to have to perform a lengthy verification on your information. And when I say verification, think audit. Has anybody ever volunteered for an audit? No. So if you can use the data retrieval tool, you should. It's not required, but it's extremely helpful for the schools and really for you. So you're not put through that lengthy verification. A school may have a question or two that they need to clear up about your information, but a lengthy verification means that every aspect of the information you put on the FAFSA needs to be reviewed. That means tax documents, bank statements, mortgage statements. You don't want to do that if you don't have to. So as you take a look at that information, that's kind of what you want to have beside you when you start the FAFSA. The most important thing about this slide, this is for full disclosure, simply so that you realize there is also a set of deadlines for the Pennsylvania State Grant. Depending on the type of school your student is planning to go to, it may be May 1 or August 1st. And mind you that the Pennsylvania State Grant application is linked to the FAFSA. So when you complete it, your student can also complete the state grant application. But if you let our FIA deadlines for the state grant drive when you submit the FAFSA, I can guarantee you by May 1st and August 1st, your families miss their best opportunities for financial aid from schools. It's already been allocated at that point. Okay? So school deadlines vary, but the state grant deadlines are there. Your student is also going to see a reminder within the FAFSA that they can complete the Pennsylvania State Grant application. Now, the reason the application exists, and it's only for prospective freshmen or first-year students, post-secondary school. What I mean to say is prospective freshmen or students going into their first year of training or education. That's the only time they need to complete the state grant application. It's not a lengthy application, but FIA will receive, and this is what you authorize when you sign the FAFSA, we will receive your FAFSA information. But we have questions related to you that are specific because you're Pennsylvania residents. So that's why the state grant application exists. Again, it's not very lengthy, it's pretty straightforward. But be prepared for that and look for it. Ultimately, when you are ready to submit the FAFSA, either with estimated information or I should say, accurate information, you're going to need to sign it. And the way that's signed electronically is with a personal identification number. One number that's been created from the parent who's completing the form, either on behalf of both parents or just themselves, and a PIN also for the student. So parents, if you've ever done a FAFSA, some of you who raised your hand, if you had done a FAFSA for a previous high school student, maybe someone who's already in college, you already probably have a PIN, I hope, that you remember. Okay, that's still your PIN for the subsequent student. If you were a student yourself and a parent, and you had a PIN for that reason, that's still your PIN, both as a student and as a parent, right? And then every student has a unique PIN as well. Now you can create the PIN at www.pin.ed.gov. You can do it ahead of time. The danger there is that you forget what it is, you forget where you put it, you forget the answer to the security questions, that's the danger. Or, with that long arrow showing you on the slide, is that you can also apply for a PIN from within the FAFSA. So at the time you want to sign the application, you go out, you create a PIN, come back into the FAFSA, and simply do it at that point. So ahead of time or not, that's your choice. But the PIN's important, particularly for your student. They're going to need it every year to renew their FAFSA. They're also going to need it to keep track of their loan information. So you want to keep that someplace secure. I recommend just putting all the financial aid stuff together, right? You know where it's at. So ultimately, you're going to receive a confirmation page when you complete the FAFSA. So I have a lot of parents sometimes who get through the thing and they don't realize they're done. Well, you will realize that because you'll have a confirmation page. At the bottom of that page will be a list of all the schools at that time that your student showed his prospective college choices or school choices, right? You will also see, and that's what you see circled, congratulations, you've completed it. And then what you see in the box is you will also see a link to that Pennsylvania State Grant. Okay? That link will appear to you only one time, the first time you see that confirmation page. Okay, so if you miss the Pennsylvania State Grant application link and it disappears the next time you go back to the FAFSA, we need you to have your FAFSA be processed for 48 hours So that information is electronically being communicated to FIA. And so if you missed the link, your student should go to FIA.org and simply create an account and complete the state grant that way. Okay, now, ultimately, FIA would come out and remind your student if they missed the link and they didn't go back to FIA.org to complete the application. We would remind them and send them a notification and say, hey, you're a Pennsylvania student. We have your FAFSA, but we don't have a state grant application. Here's the steps you need to take to go ahead and complete them. But I don't like to see families rely on that reminder. So the alternative is to go into our system and complete it that way. So ultimately now you've completed the FAFSA, again, either with accurate information or estimated information. Your student, a couple of days later, will receive an email notification if they provided an email address on the FAFSA, and that notification is going to tell them that their student aid report is available. And the student aid report, or SAR, is a summary of all the information. That's an opportunity for you to go back and correct to make sure that there aren't any obvious errors to you. Now, I'll just tell you kind of a funny story. I guess if you were a 250,000 people that this happened to, it's not so funny. And this happened last year. Mind you, it's been fixed. There was a glitch in the FAFSA that allowed families to put in cents, not just dollar figures, but also cents. That implied that there were 250,000 people who had six-figure incomes, right? Suddenly that was identified primarily because families were checking their student aid report and realizing, no, that's not my income, right? So again, it was rectified and that system glitch has been fixed, but the SAR, the bottom line is that SAR is important. Make sure you correct it if you need to. If your student doesn't provide an email address on the FAFSA, they get a snail mail letter that tells them their student aid report is available. Actually, it will send the student aid report to them. Okay, so a little bit of a slower process. A lot of parents ask me, can I use my parental email address where it asks for my student's email address? Yes, you can. If you're concerned that your student doesn't keep up with their email or they change their email address too often and they're going to put one that dies into the FAFSA system, you can certainly use your parental email address. But then mind you, you're going to get the information. So keep an eye out for that. Something that will also be on your confirmation page is something called an expected family contribution, an EFC. And I know that it sounds like that's the amount you're going to pay a school, but that is not necessarily the amount you're going to pay a school. But it is a figure, and it could be a zero, and it could go all the way up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And what that number represents is your household financial strength. So obviously, if you have if your family, your student has an EFC of 0, they've demonstrated that they're a very needy student. And as you go away from that figure, the less is the case, right? And the more financial strength you've demonstrated through the questions you answered on the FAFSA. And the most influential things that make up how that EFC is calculated through federal methodology would be your 2014 income for the parent and for the students. I should say for the parents and the student. What was your 2014 income? Also your assets. And mind you, your assets will be as of the day you signed and submitted the FAFSA. 2014 income we can't affect, right? 2014 is over. What we earned, we earned. And by the way, it's adjusted gross income. So we can't really affect that. It's a number that's already done. But assets are as of the day you complete and sign the FAFSA. So sometimes I see some light bulbs going off over people's heads. Just keep that in mind. Student income and assets. Student 2014 income and their assets as of the day they signed the FAFSA. That's a consideration. Your family size, your household. How many people are in your household? And that means anyone who's living in your household for whom you provide more than 50% support. So obviously parent or parents, student or students. Could be grandmother, your loser brother, I don't know. Whoever you're providing more than 50% support. The number of children who will be in college at the same time is a factor making up the EFC, and then the age of the older parent. Sometimes I see some happy older parents when you see that, because it's actually a good reason to be a little bit older. So how's the EFC calculated? It's primarily driven by income, again. And I should go back and say the very first thing you see on that slide is that the EFC figure assumes that there's a contribution from the student and the parent, right? So in theory, that's how that works. For the most part, we know parents, if your student earned anything in 2014, that money's probably gone, right? And in fact, they could have, you see that a little bit further down the slide, they could have in 2014 earned up to $6,300, and none of that will be used as their portion of the contribution for the EFC. So $6,300 is held harmless. Anything over that, it's just 50% of that amount that is used to establish their portion of the EFC contribution. There's an asset protection allowance. We are going to talk about specifically what are assets. But based on the age of the older parent, that asset protection allowance is applied. So the maximum amount of parent assets that could be used to determine your contribution for the EFC is 6%. And that figure will go down based on your age. The maximum asset utilized to determine the student's contribution for the EFC is 20%. So for this purpose, it's very important that you understand who owns assets. Are you the owner as the parent, or is your student the owner of an asset? Okay, because basically, very simply put, parent assets good, student assets not so much, because they're used so much more heftily to determine that EFC, right? So parents, do not be afraid to indicate your assets. More than likely, a very small amount, relatively speaking, is going to be used for the EFC. What are assets? Let's start with what are not assets. Your primary residence, the value of your personal property, the value of life insurance policy, and the sum total of your qualified retirement funds. So you don't have to sell your home or liquidate your retirement in order to send your kid to school. Bad news is, the second half of that slide, everything else is an asset. Savings, cash, stocks, bonds, investments, additional real estate that you may own, mutual funds. Right? So you'll be indicating those assets on the FAFSA. Now, a couple of things. If you have a 529 plan for your student, a tuition account program, whether that is owned by your student or by you, the parent, it's considered a parental asset. If you've got several children in the family that you own a 529 for, you must include all of that on your senior student's FAFSA, right? Because those funds can be transferred, so the whole total must be used as a parental asset. In a way, that's good news, because again, it's a parental asset. If a grandparent has purchased a 529 plan for your child, only at the time that your child utilizes that 529 does that become your student's asset on the subsequent FAFSA, because it's a gift to your student from the grandparent or aunt or uncle. Okay? Years ago, that was a brilliant loophole. We could get grandparents to buy the 529s, and it was no one's asset. It wasn't the parents, it wasn't the students. And that loophole was closed several years ago. So, just so you know, that's a little nuance about the 529s. Net value of additional real estate. Remember, that's not your primary home, but you'll be asked to show fair market value of the real estate that you own. And this is where I like to say there's no FAFSA police. There's no federal people employed to correct your FAFSAs or verify your FAFSA. The real FAFSA police, if you will, would be the financial aid officers at schools, right? They're the ones looking at discrepancies. So if you, and I'm just suggesting, if you significantly undervalue the worth of additional real estate for example, the discrepancy is probably going to show up in your property taxes, right? For example. So it's those kinds of discrepancies that school agents are looking for, and they are truly under the gun to be good stewards of this federal money. So any of these assets that you list, they're the folks that will be reviewing that, making sure that they don't see those kinds of obvious discrepancies. So I know I've asked you to hold the questions until the end, and hopefully I'll answer them in the meantime, but basically we've gotten through what's maybe the most complex part of how financial aid is determined by each of the schools. So you're going to feel like, why did I have to hurry up and complete that FAFSA? And now I'm not hearing from these schools for months. Because that's exactly what's going to happen. Right? You need to hurry up and get your information into them by the recommended filing deadlines, but then you're probably not going to hear from most schools with a tentative financial aid package probably until end of March, beginning of April, maybe even mid-April, May. Right? And it's only until that time do you really know what your net price is at the schools. So there's a lot of time that happens in between now and then, and basically what the schools are doing is they're speculating. What is the size of the freshman class expected to be? How many returning students do they have? What's the pot of money that they have? And how are they going to allocate it? And that is why if you wait and you come in very late with your FAFSA information, they've already allocated that money, whether or not they've communicated that to families. That money in theory is already out there distributed, okay? So, and also during that amount of time, some things may have been going on in your household. If you have significant medical expenses, dental expenses, if you've lost your job, or you've significantly decreased the number of hours you're at your job, or there's been a death or disability of an income or a wage earner, you want to communicate that to the schools, because there's no way you can go back to the FAFSA and change what was the case in 2014. But now 2015 is very different, right? And the assumption that the schools make is that 2015, in terms of your income, is probably going to be like 2014. But if that's not the case, you need to tell them. And that, parents, is something you want to remember for when your student is a returning college sophomore, junior, or senior. Anytime that kind of thing happens, it's a catastrophic loss and significantly affects your household financial strength. Let them know. Give them the opportunity to take another look at your students' award package. Okay, and of course, FIA has a process for that as well. We've got a form, and your student's school can help them through our process as well. So we've talked about the FAFSA, the state grant application. There's also another application that's out there that does not negate the FAFSA. It would be in addition to the FAFSA, called the College Scholarship Service Profile, or CSS Profile. It's only used by about 18 schools in Pennsylvania, but some scholarship services use it as well, and certainly schools outside of Pennsylvania. So your student really needs to know that their school choice, one of the schools that they're looking at, requires the CSS profile. They tend to be selective, private institutions, but again, scholarship organizations as well. And if your student is not looking at a school that requires the CSS profile, there's really no need for you to complete it. It is a more complicated form. There's costs associated with it. Right? But if in fact your student needs to complete it, then that's part of the school's financial aid process. And you can always go to collegeboard.org for more information on it. It's a product of the College Board, by the way. And again, it does not negate the FAFSA. It is in addition to the FAFSA. And the primary difference is the FAFSA relates to the student and the parent or parents. The CSS profile really is concerned with the student and any other source of income that that student may have. So it goes out into another realm. There's also some institutional applications, but those are occurring less and less. But again, your students should know what kind of forms they need to complete for their school choices. Make sure that you don't forget those. So really simply put, what's happening during that time that you're waiting to hear from schools is that they're they are determining a school cost for your student, a cost of attendance. And in this scenario, it's $26,000. At this point, you'd be lucky if that was the case. Subtract from that the EFC, the expected family contribution, and what remains is your financial need. Is that your actual cost? No, but that's the beginning point. From that figure is where the school and you begin to hopefully whittle away that number, right, in order to make the school affordable for you. Virtually no schools will meet a student's need up to 100%. So if that calculation was a real scenario, virtually no school would meet that need. Harvard does, in some cases, but Harvard's one of about 15 schools across the country that do that. So you cannot expect that that $23,000 is going to be met by the school. That cost of attendance is different for every student, usually, and different for every major, mostly at schools. It includes those direct costs like tuition, room, and board, and fees that must be paid, but then also indirect costs like transportation to get your student to and from the school, right, in between breaks and in between semesters. Also miscellaneous living expenses. If the student does have a dependent, the cost of the care for that dependent, etc. So it basically gives you a little bit of padding in what is it really going to cost to send my student there. We know as adults it doesn't just cost tuition, room, board, and fees to get a student successfully to school. And then ultimately what you're going to receive from all of the schools that believe your student is still going to attend, right? So lo and behold, it becomes April, and there are 3 schools that your student has on the line, and they've not told any of those schools that they're not attending. You're going to receive a financial aid award from those schools. And that's the point at which, now that you've engaged them in the financial aid process, that's the point at which you really know what is the bottom line and what are we responsible to pay, right? That's our net price. Because those schools are going to communicate to your student what is available to them in federal aid, campus-based aid, merit aid programs, etc., right? And then what is the bottom line? So these are the need-based programs. And remember, this is just not even half of the pie. This is a piece of the pie. I can't really elaborate on merit-based aid because I don't know what characteristics your student possesses. I don't know what the schools are looking for from your student, but do not dismiss that. That's an important part of the pie. But these are the need-based programs. The Pell Grant, which goes to the neediest of students. It is directly related to the amount of your expected family contribution. For better or worse, I'm going to go there. If your expected family contribution is over approximately $5,100, your student is not going to be eligible for a Pell Grant. That is the threshold at which the need for the Pell Grant exists. Right? So if you have an EFC over that amount, you're not going to see a Pell Grant. I hate to go there, but now you know, so you can plan. Campus-based aid is federal money, but it's called campus-based aid because the schools distribute it to the students based on their own aid policies of the schools, and every school differs. And these are the programs, in part, that make it true that, again, hypothetical schools, that an award from IUP, which generally costs the same as Edinburgh, might be very different from an award from Edinburgh, right? And you can interchange any kind of schools you want in there. It is because of these campus-based aid programs, how the schools distribute these dollars. So the FSEOG is a federal supplemental educational opportunity grant that maxes out at $4,000. There may be some increases in these programs over the next several months. The Perkins loan. The Perkins loan is not the student loan, but it's a loan originated between the school and the student, and not every school participates in the Perkins loan program. And the Perkins loan, if there is such a thing, is a good loan, because no interest accrues on the loan while your student is in school. So that's free money for 4 years, right? But then when they graduate or stop out, it's a 10-year repayment, and it's a 5% standard interest rate, or fixed interest rate, right? So if your student is looking at a school that participates in a Perkins loan, that's probably going to be helpful, but you want to meet their recommended filing deadline too. And then work study. Federal work study is a program that allows a student to work in between their classes, hopefully in an area or a department that has something to do with their major. But there is no major for the cafeterias or dining halls, so that exists as well. But generally, the work study program is a very good program. It keeps a student connected to the campus, and it does give them extra money. But mind you, your student has to work off the award, right? So in that award letter, if you see a $1,500 work study award for each semester, that means that your student must work up to $1,500 in order for that money to fill any gap you have, right? So the bill will come before your student has that opportunity. And what most families do is they allow their student to use those work study funds for their spending money. And you can also have your student contributed back to their bill at their school, right? It'll automatically go that way. But that's your choice. But just remember, your student must actually work in order to get that award. Work study program pays students at least minimum wage, but most schools will pay more. And work study income does not count against your student on subsequent years' FAFSAs. So if there's an opportunity for your student either to work in town near their campus or work on campus through the work study program, if all things were the same, work study program is probably a better option because it's income that won't penalize them. Okay? Also remember this, don't have your poor freshman kid, if you get a work study award, wait till they get on campus that first day to go look for their work study job, because it will be gone, right? Work study awards are over-awarded, so your student needs to be competitive about actually landing the position on campus. Some schools have an extra application, some schools just assign students, for the most part, right? But you need to know, your student needs to know, what's my school's process for work study, because I want that job. We recommend on the FAFSA that you have your student answer yes to the question about, do you want work study? Right? If they opt out later, they can. They have that option. You never have to accept any type of financial aid. You can reject it all, or any part of it. Right? But it is far easier if your student answers yes on the FAFSA to the work study option, far easier to get that option than to get it down the road if they've answered no on the FAFSA. So try and remember that. And then there's a Pennsylvania State grant. Regrettably, I say that because it's been the last 4 years that we've been level funded, so the award maxes out at $4,000, $4,011. Okay. And the award is relative to the cost of education, so the higher the amount of tuition at the school, the closer you will be to that max or meet that max award. And you can see if your student decides to go outside of Pennsylvania, they've drastically reduced their state grant award. Now, most out-of-state schools realize that from Pennsylvania residents. The same thing is happening from their residents who decide to come into Pennsylvania. So there may be other aid to compensate for that. You would want to look for that. But do know that there are very few schools these days that we have reciprocal agreements with, and even at that, it's a maximum of $600. And there are other programs. These are the other FIA administrative programs. Each of these has its own criteria and nuances. So we'd be here a very long time for me to explain each and every one of these. So that's another reason why you want to look at that student aid guide, that little booklet in the back. Make sure you take that, because each of these programs are explained on page 20. I do just want to point out that the very first thing listed there is the state work study. It's an alternative program to federal work study. It may be that your student doesn't meet federal eligibility, but may meet the guidelines for state work study, so it gives them another option. Students don't have any clue as to whether they're federal work-study students or state work-study students, because they don't care where the money comes from, right? But it is the same basic rules as federal work-study. The other thing I would like to mention is the last program listed there, which is the Pennsylvania Targeted Industry Program. If your student is looking at technical education, right, they plan to go to a career school or technical education, for some major related to manufacturing, agriculture, or at this very moment, I just lost the third one. Thank you. I don't have any of that today. Energy, manufacturing, agriculture. There are specific schools and specific programs that participate in the TIP program. So you want to take a look at that. TIP is about 3 years old, and it's very infrequent these days that we are introducing new aid programs. And it's nice for students interested in technical ed, so please check that out if that's the route they're planning to pursue. And since I have covered all the income-based aid that exists, again, I'm going to reiterate how important it is for your student to bring in other sources of aid, look for merit-based aid, right? And reduce your costs if you're concerned about affordability. The most important thing on this slide that you're looking at is the last thing. Your student needs to graduate on time. The 5th year of a 4-year degree will cost you at least 20% more than the first year did, and so on. And very few students, regrettably, are completing their 4-year degrees in 4 years, and there are some valid reasons for that, but not many. Most of the reasons for that is because students flounder. They flounder in terms of their dedication to the major. They're not really sure why they're there. They're not really sure about their career, and they switch majors several times. That lengthens the time they're there. Or they flounder academically, which may mean they're not in a good match for them. Maybe their school doesn't provide enough academic support. Could be a number of things, but most of them are not positive reasons. So it's really important that a student graduate on time. Students who take summer classes are saving hundreds of dollars because those very same classes the following fall will cost hundreds of dollars more. Right? So if a kid stays on a college campus after the spring term and just takes a 2-week session, or maybe even a 3-week session, right? They complete in that very small amount of time what they would in a semester, but the classes are less expensive by hundreds of dollars. So that's an option, and there's several others if you're worried about affordability. And then of course scholarships, and we advocate Fast Web as a legitimate scholarship search engine. There's a profile that your student will have to complete, and it's a little bit lengthy, but once they do that, which it nails all of their characteristics, then this website will provide your student a list of scholarships that match their criteria. This, again, I go back to your race, your religion, your heritage, your students' grades, their athletic ability, etc. And in terms of scams, we simply say, if you get contacted by an organization that your student did not initiate contact with, you should be leery. You should be leery of terms like guarantee. You should be leery of punctuation mistakes, mistakes in your address, those kinds of things in letters that you might receive. Seems simple, but those are what the scams are, very obvious. And oh, that's right.
In terms of scholarships in the counseling office, we advertise all of the local scholarships, meaning usually from Western Pennsylvania or specifically Allegheny County. There are multiple ways that you can view this list. We do have a paper copy in the counseling office that students can pick up, but it's not always perfectly up to date. So probably the best way is either going onto the school counseling website. So when you go on to northallegheny.org, you would choose Nash as your school and then go to school counseling. And these are all on a little half slip of paper that was in the back. Secondly, we post them on our Facebook page, which is the Nash School Counseling Department. You have to type that in exactly like that and then hit like, and then you will receive our news feed with updates and scholarships. And then thirdly, we have a Twitter account. It's at Nash Counselors, and we also put all the scholarship information on that. There are tons of scholarships in our office with very few applicants. Very, very few. Sometimes we interview 2 or 3 kids for a scholarship. So please take advantage of the multiple opportunities that we have.
I would reiterate that. I get contacted every year by an organization, a Kiwanis Club, a Rotary Club, who says we have this scholarship and nobody's applied for it. All we need is a 250-word essay and a reference. So that one student who does apply for that scholarship, you know, has a pretty good chance of getting it, right? And as you said, that happens too much. So let's say you've attacked all of those things we've already talked about, you've done your very best, and still now you get the award package from the school and you have a bottom line, meaning your actual cost, out-of-pocket cost, that you cannot afford. And that's when we come to the realm of loans. And the notion of loans is really the last step in the whole process, because your student needs to choose their final college choice. The colleges or the schools are significantly engaged in this part of the process. They must certify your students' loans. And what I'm talking about right now are federal student loans, the student loan. Back in the day, don't shake your head, you'll date yourself along with me. They used to be called the Guaranteed Student Loan, GSL. Remember the Stafford Loan Program? Well, now it's the Direct Loan Program, because students are borrowing directly off the government. That's all I'm going to say about that. And there's 2 ways these loans exist. Subsidized, which means the interest will be paid on that loan while your student is in school, or unsubsidized, which means interest will be accruing on that loan while your student is in school. And students could actually get a combination of each type of loan in the same academic year. Who makes that determination is the school. If your student shows a legitimate financial need for the loan, more than likely it'll be subsidized. If not, it will be unsubsidized. And remember that your students have every right to walk into their financial aid office and initiate a student loan, originate a loan. There's a process they have to go through. It's called entrance counseling. But the federal government says if your student would like a loan for educational expenses, whether that's really what it is, that student can get it. We could call education expenses a nicer cell phone, right? A new PC, a coat, travel money. Is that the true spirit of what these loans are about? No, but that's how they've become to be used in some instances. So be very careful about what your student does on their own, because parents, they don't need you to originate a federal loan. Right? They don't need your signature, they don't need your permission. So the other type of federal direct loan would be the PLUS loan, parent loan for undergraduate students, and that also exists for graduate students. So let's take a look. This is the current interest rates for the undergraduate federal direct loan, subsidized or unsubsidized. 4.66. 5-6 years ago, this was at 2 point something, right? But this is where we're at right now. It's called a variable fixed loan, which means it will, which is funny, you can go ahead and laugh, a variable fixed loan. Right? That's where both sides of the aisle got together last July. Came up with that. Variable fixed means that it's fixed in the specific academic year, but it's variable from year to year. And you can see that it's capped at 8.25%. So who knows what will happen on July 1st? That interest rate comes off of the Treasury bill, just like other credit does. However, the federal government says while your student is eligible to borrow if they choose to, either subsidized or unsubsidized, the government says we're not going to let them limitlessly borrow, right? So these programs are limited in terms of the amount that your student can borrow each year that they're in school. And that year, freshmen, sophomore, juniors, seniors, is determined by the number of credits that they've achieved. I've seen freshmen be in school for 3 years. That does not make them juniors, right? Thank you. So the government says we're going to let them borrow, but they don't have a credit history, they don't have a job, and there's no promise they're going to pay it back, so we're going to limit it. And there's also a parent program, the Plus Loan. Now, if you take a look at this, those of you nodding your head east to west are looking at it. It's a high interest rate. You pay a significant fee right off the top. That comes off the top. So the Plus Loan used to be a good program, not so much any longer. Used to be more selective, not so much any longer. Just about every parent who applies for a Plus Loan is eligible and will be approved. If you've ever had a bankruptcy where you're delinquent on anything that's been referred to one of the credit bureaus, at the time you apply, you'll be denied. Short of that, most parents are eligible for the Plus Loan. But for that, you could call it convenience, for that flexibility, you also have to pay for it in terms of the interest rate and that fee. So, biggest message here is that if your student is going to borrow through the direct loan program, we highly recommend that if you need to take a loan, that they do take that loan first and exhaust those limitations, right? But parents, you may be in a better situation where you don't need to rely on the Plus Loan. For parents who do, because they don't have the financial resources otherwise, they don't have a lender who's going to offer them a loan, they don't have a credit union who is, then this is their alternative, right? But you need to determine as parents whether this is a loan program for you if you need to borrow. Parents who are denied a Plus Loan, they can have that denial letter taken to the student's school, and the government will allow the school to borrow, will allow the student to borrow additional amounts, but it will be unsubsidized, so interest will be accruing. Now there are some families who like their students to take out a student loan because that gives the student, a horse in the race, right? A little bit of a vested interest in what they're doing, so whether your family needs to or not, they have the student borrow. If that's the case, that's fine, but your student may only get an unsubsidized loan in that case because they truly don't have a need, but you want them to borrow. Mind you, as interest is accruing, if you're able to pay that interest for your student on a quarterly basis over the 4 years that they're in school, you're going to save them thousands of dollars. So if your student does receive an unsubsidized loan, if you're able to pay those relatively small quarterly interest payments, that'll help your kid down the road. This is a website you should be very familiar with. And we tie students by their hands and their feet and bound them and gag them and tell them they should get familiar with it as well. And they don't usually until they're graduating and they realize what their total loan indebtedness is. But this is a great resource to determine what's the difference between federal loans, private loans, what are the repayment plans. And I should mention that's why we recommend that the student exhaust their federal loan options, because there are 15 different repayment plans available with those. Don't shake your head, but if you remember back in the day, you took whatever you borrowed, divided it by 120 payments, which was 10 years, and that's what you paid on your student loan, right? Students can't afford that now. So there are now loan programs, repayment programs that would allow a student to repay up for 25 years. There are hardship options as well. So that's one benefit of the federal loan programs. The other benefit is that they can be forgiven based on your student's career choice, and they can also be discharged in the case of disability, sometimes bankruptcy, but certainly death. Okay, and I know this is hard to consider your strapping young child in that scenario, but remember that these are loans they're paying on for 20, 25 years, right? They are discharged federal loans if the student is permanently disabled or actually dies. That may sound harsh to you, but alternative loans don't do that. And alternative loans have nothing to do with the federal government. They almost always require a cosigner because the alternative loans are made available by lenders. And they're saying, hey, wait a minute, your kid doesn't have a credit history, no job, there's no promise we're going to get this money back, so we want a cosigner. And these loans exist because students have exhausted all their federal options, parents have exhausted all their options, and now we need another pot of money to make up for that actual bottom line, right? So there's a purpose for these, but they can be very risky. So be very cautious if you go to the extent that you're using an alternative loan for your student. It may be that's when you talk about affordability. Do we really want to go to that extent to pay for my student's school choice? So be cautious. In order to not get into that over-indebtedness, what we really suggest is that your student really understands their job possibilities. Why are they choosing a specific major? Why are they choosing a specific job? What's the possibility of them being hired? Particularly if they have a geographic area that they want to stay in. And that information is absolutely available to them. They should also know what their expected salary is. The average federal loan debt for a Pennsylvania student is about $30,000. We have no idea what they've also borrowed from private loans or those alternative loans. So bump that up quite a bit, right? Well, as a rule of thumb, we generally say to a student, you should not borrow more than you can expect to earn in your first year of working. That's very hard to maintain, but generally when you keep those ratios in proportion, then the student is not in trouble and they can afford to live on their own, pay that student loan and all their other expenses, and not come back to your house, right? Like a boomerang. So, that information in terms of careers and salaries, and it's geographically specific, is available on educationplanner.org. That's a free website that FEA has made available. I also threw up the Pennsylvania College Transfer.com. This will help a student if they decide that they need to go someplace less expensive, someplace more accommodating to their needs initially, and then transfer to the school of their dreams. This is a website that can help them to do that seamlessly without needing more time. And then we also make available through Education Planner a website, or on its own, called My Smart Borrowing, which is an interactive tool. Your student would plug in some numbers about what's their career choice, what's their college choice, right, or school choice. And this could be from Pennsylvania or all over the United States. And then this website will build a budget for them. Again, this is your housing costs, your clothing costs, your entertainment, assuming they're living on their own, your internet costs, your phone costs, your student loan costs. And again, we'll show them through that sliding graph you see in the middle there. You know, are you in the red zone, which means they're coming back to you? Are you in the yellow zone, which means it's cautionary? Or are you in the green zone? Do you have enough money each month to really live on your own and make those college debts, or pay for those college debts? So these are great tools. They're available for you. And on that note, I wish I had a funny slide to show you, but I don't. And I am willing to take some questions, and I just want to say this about that. Some of these questions may not pertain to you. I will repeat them. It will not pertain to all of you. I will repeat them. If we go on a little long, I tend to lose the whole group. And so let me just say this now. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. I hope the information was helpful to you. Again, there's my contact information if you need any assistance before you get that first bill. All right? But are there any questions that I could address right now? Yes, ma'am. The question was, why did I encourage students to list their school options on the FAFSA in terms of their preference, right? Have number one, number two, number two. First thing is that if a student is listing the first school, that is the school that the Pennsylvania State Grant Program will use to calculate their eligibility. That's one thing, all right? Also, you should know that all colleges that are listed on the FAFSA at this current time, because there's some talk of this changing, they each see the other schools your student listed. So yes, it does present an opportunity for some fun competition. Okay? Yes, ma'am. The question was related to that, indicating that if a student lists the number 1 school, number 2 and number 3 are probably going to be a little more aggressive because they want to lure the student away from number 1. I would not disagree with that. That's the whole idea of the preference order. And that's why I say it makes for some fun competition. Schools are doing whatever they can to ensure and track interest, right? So if I know at my school this student has attended 2 open houses, sat in on classes, spent a week overnight, or a weekend overnight, right? Applied early, has great grades, and listed us 3rd, right? I mean, they start to make some assumptions in terms of recruitment. Now, none of that should have anything to do with federal-based aid, and it should be aid blind. But it does have more to do with, hey, that kid, that same scenario, attended all of these programs and listed us number 1. We think they're coming. So yeah, you could look at that. I won't disagree that there is some rationale to how those. Yes, do families go back and say, I really wanted to come to your school, but I can't afford the package that you gave me? Yes. And it's worth a shot. I will tell you, parents, if you're going to do something like that, you make an appointment with someone in the financial aid office who has the authority to make that change. Otherwise, you're just voicing your opinion. Sure. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Could you summarize the process from the start? You described what the family can afford, what the school discounts or gives you in terms of financial aid. Then you look at the process of grants, and then the balance to do it, and then you would make up the rest in loans.
I feel like you just did summarize that. No, sir, I mean that. I'm not being flip. You mentioned all the components. Free money, grants, right? Need-based aid, which is also free money. Merit-based aid, scholarships, loans. If with all of those resources there's still a bottom line, that's out-of-pocket costs, and so are loans, really. That's tomorrow's money.
So early on, schools will give you more or less a price that they say, well, this is our list price for education, but here's what we will discount.
That is correct. There is a sticker price. And then with whatever your student is eligible for, income-based aid and merit-based aid, that comes out of there, and what results is the net cost. Then that net cost is either covered by your own family resources or loans. I told you I'd start losing people. Yes. Yes, it is just one application. Yep. Yes, just the FAFSA, unless your student is looking at a school that requires the CSS profile. And the reason why the FAFSA is important, even if you believe you're not going to be eligible for federal financial aid, is most schools will still want to have a sense of what's going on financially in the home, because they don't have enough money either. So they leverage what they do have as best they can. So some of those merit awards are also interdependent on your need. And some are not, some have nothing to do with it. But generally, schools need to efficiently use their monies. So they'll look at the FAFSA. Yes. We do recommend that you still complete the FAFSA, even if you believe you're not eligible for any federal financial aid, for the purposes of what might be available at any specific school. And also, ultimately, it's the loan application for the student. Yes?
You had mentioned about making corrections to the FAFSA. So every time you make a correction, does that go to the school you list, or
time you make a correction to the FAFSA, that information goes back to the school. They basically do a sweep and see what has been changed on the application since the last time they took a look at it.
That doesn't become confusing then, if they do it one time and you never resend? Or does it, this seems to me when we confuse the payoff.
It's all electronic. I mean, is it confusing? Not really, not to the school. It's all electronic. Yes. So the question was, for those of you in the back, if a student took a few years or a year off after a gap year after high school and then goes into post-secondary education, does it matter? It does not matter that I can imagine no, it doesn't matter for any of those federal aid programs that I told you about. It doesn't matter for the state grant. But it may matter for any type of merit-based aid that the school he attends has. Because some of them do stipulate this is for a direct, the direct graduate from high school. But that would be it, that I can think of. Yes, ma'am. That is correct. May 1st is considered the ethical deadline for a school to let you know what your financial aid award letter or financial aid award package would be. May 1st. That's because they should have communicated to you by May 1. And generally students need to give a school a decision by May 1. That's because the school should have communicated to you by May 1 what the financial aid award is going to be. That's true, it can be very close. There are some schools who refund their deposit up until May 1 because maybe in February you thought everything was hunky-dory and then it turns awry. Pardon me? It can be a very tight deadline, yep. Yes. Yes, schools can. Yes, schools can send you an initial tentative aid award package. And then a final. Mind you, most of them are not final until after July 1 anyway. We're talking funny money a little bit because tuition increases every year. Well, it changes every year and it usually increases come July 1. So they can sort of account for what they think their tuition is going to be based on what the Board of Governors or their boards have actually said, but it's all a little murky. It's not precise. Yes, sir. No, student in Grove City can qualify for a federal loan. We're talking about Grove City College, which does not confer federal financial aid. And students can also qualify for the Pennsylvania State Grant, who are attending Grove City. Yes?
Schools seem to be sending us letters of acceptance. We should send our money in. Should we be sending money in, or as you say, that's pulling a seat for you? Or is it just a pull there, or should we be waiting until we see this?
So this relates to the deposits, right? There's an admissions deposit, and then after that gets sent in, they want a residence hall deposit. Some schools will, and so what do you do if your student, if you really don't know what the costs are, if your student has really decided? Some schools will refund that if you change your mind and your student cancels by a certain day. Otherwise, I've seen some families say, oh, that's what we have to do, and if we have to lose that money, we'll lose that money. It's not so much, I wouldn't consider it a ploy on the part of the colleges. What they're doing is speculating, and they're trying to determine who's coming here. No, 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 no. Let's hope there's still some humanity. Correct. Now see, when you send those deposits to those schools believe that your student is attending each and every one of them, not knowing necessarily, you know, if you send it to 3 schools, that there's really 2 schools that your kid's not going to. And so if you leave them, string them out until April, all 3 of them will send an award package. And to be quite honest, if you list the schools on the FAFSA and you want to have a better sense before that award package is coming to you of what kind of package you could expect, you can certainly give the schools a call. No, you won't. No, I didn't, no. Actually, I did not mean that. Your student has to be accepted for sure. Generally, though, no. Most of the schools are not going to communicate with you something like a financial aid package until you've deposited, until you've accepted that offer of admission. So I'm going to stick with that. The only other thing, if you don't want to send the deposit and you want to talk turkey about finances, is call the school's financial aid officer and say, look, before I send this deposit in, I need to know where are we. Yes. No, the expected family contribution is determined at the point at which you submit the FAFSA by the federal government. And that EFC does not change from school to school. So that stands whether your student is attending CCAC and commuting there or Carnegie Mellon. It's going to be the same EFC at both institutions. But clearly there'll be a bigger gap at CMU. Was that overkill with the example? Little hyperbole? Yes, sir. Not so much. And that's the funny thing about financial aid. Is the EFC determined every year? There's just a few key questions that are asked on the renewal. And from that point on, your student's award package in terms of need-based aid is fairly consistent. What hopefully will change is your kid's going to get to that school and be a great freshman, and now is going to be up, maybe not so much. And maybe he's going to be eligible for merit-based aid scholarships, right? So that changes the whole thing. Poor kid. Yes, ma'am. There's just one thing I didn't hear you say. Oh, do you go back and do? Oh. No, you don't update your assets. Assets are as of the day you sign the FAFSA. Having said that, since you're such an attentive group, let me just mention that a financial aid officer has every has every right to request additional information about your assets. And what they call this is a snapshot. That's a snapshot as the day you signed it. But the potential exists that they're still curious about something and they want to see something more up to date. There's no look back per se, but they may look for something more up to date. But I got to tell you, these folks don't have the time that it would take, for the most part. You've got to be talking about a highly irregular discrepancy for them to want to devote that time. Yes, sir. Anytime after January 1st of the senior year, based on the prospective colleges she's looking at, their recommended filing deadlines. Yeah, yes.
Basically, I guess to add on to that question. So you're saying the school has a different deadline
No, you have the same, in terms of deadlines, when you're thinking about recommended FAFSA filing deadlines, as long as you meet the school's deadline, there's no benefit, you'll be fine. There's no benefit to coming in 3 weeks earlier than that deadline.
Because the options are you could do your taxes now, or the estimate.
Correct.
They would
Yep.
ask, or wait for you to have the tax information.
You're correct. The reason I don't, you're correct. You could just wait, if your student is looking at a school whose deadline is April 1st, you know you'll have your taxes done by then, and you're good, you're good with that, you just want to submit the accurate information on time. You can absolutely do that, but the reason I don't present that as an option is because I've seen too many students change their minds, and they decide they want to go to a school whose deadline is well in advance of that one school's deadline that they have been planning on for months, right? So it's not that the benefit is coming in earlier than that one deadline. It's just as early as you reasonably can, because you never know what your parents, you never know what your students are going to do, right? And how it goes. So, yes. So that question about the CSS profile, I don't know the answer to that. I would encourage you to check out the College Board website for that answer. Can't help you there. Yes, not you again. I can. Let's see how bitter and jaded you are. If you were to start and stop it all in one sitting, the federal government says it takes 38 minutes, which is a minute and a half less than last year. So see, another fun fact I don't even bother with, because we all know if they say 38 minutes, it's going to take you an hour and a half. No, it really it doesn't. I do FAFSA completion sessions with families. If you have a relatively easy scenario, right, not a lot of complications, a lot of assets, if you have a moderate amount, it takes about 40 minutes, 45 minutes. Yes? Yep. I don't think it's too late to convert savings accounts into 529 accounts. I don't think that it is. That's a maneuver that can be kind of efficient. Mm-hmm. Correct. With the assets, because you have up to the day you sign. Yeah. That's smart. That's why he's your investment counselor. Good job. Any other, yes, sir?
We're looking to upgrade our house for a bigger house. Does it matter if you need to buy the house? If it's your primary residence?
Correct. Your primary residence is not considered an asset. However, if you do really well in selling the home you're currently in, and you get a boatload of money that you've got to put somewhere, because the next house you buy you're not going to need, then you've got a boatload of money that isn't liquidated, that you could liquidate for your student's expense. Chances of that happening though? No, not going to happen. I know. Yes.
Do you list your liabilities?
You do not list liabilities on the FAFSA.
So if you have a business that is worth $500,000, if you have loans on that.
Business is a different scenario. If you own a business and it's a family-owned business and it employs less than 100 people, it's not considered an asset either way. But if you own a business, not a family business, and maybe employs over 100 people, if you have a zero worth of that, you indicate zero.
And like he just asked about the house, the asset, even though he may owe more and have no more equity available to him because he bought a more expensive house.
That liability is not part of the consideration. No? Yes, sir.
If the parent gets a tuition benefit for their child as part of their employment, does
I'm
that
sorry,
get...
I didn't hear anything.
Sorry. So, if a parent gets a tuition benefit as part of their employment for their child, how does that get recorded on the FAFSA? Is that the expected family contribution?
No, a tuition benefit from a college, I'm assuming,
Yeah.
right? That's handled internally at the school level. In terms of the FAFSA, that doesn't come into play at all. But when the school is creating your student's award, they're taking into account that reduced cost for their education. If you were here when I did that, when I showed that slide of the cost of attendance,
Uh-huh.
your student's cost of attendance will be adjusted accordingly to reflect that discount.
So it comes at a later stage.
It does.
Okay.
Yes. Sorry. Yes, because relatively, it does, but relatively speaking, you're gonna be spending more for those three.
Could you step to the microphone, please?
Yes. So the question was about having 3 students in school at the same time. Each of those students' EFC will be a third, right? If you had 2, it would be half. Each of the students assuming half of that total amount. So you will get more financial aid, more than likely, but it's relative. You'll be spending more to begin with. So it does increase your chances for need-based aid, but again, relatively speaking, you're spending more. Yes, ma'am. If you have what? Oh. What do you do if you have 11 schools to list on the FAFSA? There is a process. I think what you need to do is tell the 11th school that you want them listed on the FAFSA, but there's only room for 10. But that happens so rarely, I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure. Sorry, I don't have an answer. I think I'd kill your kid, but other than that, that's okay. Well, that makes sense. Okay. Yes. No, student athletes should go through the same process. No, but it's, okay, so the question is it a myth, the more students you have in college, is it ever possible to really be able to afford that? No, downside, the value of your home or what the cost of making. Everything that you're thinking is correct, but I just want to go back and say to you, there could be a family that has 10 children, but if you make $1.5 million, you make too much money for financial aid. You know, as an example. Again, my examples are... I would imagine. And don't forget, no matter how wealthy the parents are, the student can always borrow. But if they don't really demonstrate what is considered a need to borrow, it's just unsubsidized. Interest will accrue while they're in school. Yes, ma'am. That's correct. When a student is offered a scholarship from the school, that's going to be part of his award package. What you still need to determine is what is any need-based aid going to happen, right? If a student brings a significant amount of outside scholarships into play, a school has every right to reduce any other type of aid that they provided to your student. They rarely do, but they have that right, because it appears that they're penalizing the student, and frankly, they would be. So they tend not to do that, but it is a possibility. Whereas they may say, well, you know what, we're going to take away your work study award because you are bringing this in, and some other students could really use that work study, as an example. No, there's no limit to scholarship. No. No. Sure. Absolutely. Merit-based scholarships and merit-based aid, without it, even if your math is poor, you know that after 40-some slides that I had, there were two based on financial aid, need-based aid, one for the feds and one for the state grant. So absolutely, any type of merit-based aid that you can have your student bring to the table. That's why those scholarships are so extremely important. And you can't get a kid to write a 250-word essay most of the time, so it's really disheartening. Pardon me? Really, cut and paste. Do you remember when we had to use the eraser? Yes. Oh, you mean loan forgiveness? There are loan forgiveness programs out there. No, usually loan forgiveness has to do with the nature of the career, and you're probably talking about public service loan forgiveness. Physical therapists would be in that realm, sure, and nurses. Yeah, sure. All right, folks, yes?
After thinking over your answer to the first couple of questions about the order of the colleges that you list on the FAFSA, and I believe you mentioned listing them in order of preference. It seems to me I've read somewhere some conflicting advice with that, which would be to list them alphabetically so that you would not get into a situation where the number one school says, ha, if he really wants to come here, we don't have to give him as much. What's your thinking on that, listing them alphabetically?
This goes back to how do you list the schools. There is a school of thought that says, rather than list them in order of priority or preference, list them alphabetically. You could do that.
Is there a downside?
Well, I just don't think that a school ever makes that assumption that that kid's coming here. So even if they list the school first, I just don't believe that. I do think, and I think it was you that said it, that makes number 2 and number 3 say, wait a minute. We want to be number 1. I don't think it can ever work in the students, not work in their favor by listing the top school first. I don't think a school ever says the kid's going to come here. In fact, I know that, really.
Well, what if you're a school fairly far down the list and you say, this kid doesn't want to come here, why should we throw any money at him?
Well, this woman with 11 schools is going to have a hard time, right? Because really, once you get past 3 or 4, does number 7 really rank any higher than number 9? So then it becomes kind of arbitrary. Honestly, I wouldn't concern yourself so much with that. It's just a theory to list them in preference and always keep number 1, number 1. Yes, ma'am. No, number one doesn't have to be a particular kind of school. Genuinely, what is the student's preference at that time? And remember, you can always reorder them. No matter where you put a particular school. Yep, yes. Yes. Sure. Schools can do that. This is not to say that every school does that or has the ability to do that, but really what that is a merit award. He has some characteristic that Pitt wants. How many people from Wyoming are at Pitt? Right? So we got to get a Wyoming kid in here. It's good for our diversity. Absolutely. Yes.
I'm sorry if you answered this before I came in, but there is one question about supposedly optional. Will you supply your kids' driver's license information? Is there any reason to do or not do that?
On the FAFSA to put the driver's license?
Yeah.
No, I don't see any reason to or not to do that.
Thank you.
Sure. There's also a question on the FAFSA that asks, what's the educational attainment of your parents? That's simply because it's a federal form. That has nothing to do with a Pennsylvania student because we have no programs related to whether your dad has a doctorate or your mother didn't finish school or whatever the combination, but some states do. Based on the level of education, that student might be up for a grant. So there are some questions I couldn't give you the rationale as to why they're on the FAFSA, but I don't see any issue with showing the driver's license. I can't think of why that would hurt or help. Yes. So this pertains to a look back, right? If you reposition assets, remember it's as of the day you signed the FAFSA. So it is what it is that day. Now, I'll give you an example though, where bonds. You may have bonds right now, and until you actually cash those bonds in, there's no paper trail that you even own them. But the chapter and verse on the FAFSA, the longer I stay here, the worse this is going to be. But the chapter and verse is that bonds must be listed. Non-educational bonds are considered an asset. So with them sitting in the bank, you are supposed to say what the current face value, current market value is of them, right? Let's say you listened really hard to what I just said and you've decided I'm not listing those bonds, right? And then your student becomes a returning junior and the cost increased 15% than it had been 2 years ago, and so now you want to cash those bonds in. Then a really astute, with a financial aid officer with a lot of time on their hands is going to say, how come these bonds weren't on your FAFSA 2 years ago? So in that respect, there's a look back, but repositioning assets really should not cause any grief. Qualified retirement accounts are held harmless. That's your 401ks, your 403bs, your IRAs. Yes, sir. Okay. Earlier, what I said was the sum total of your qualified retirement accounts are held harmless. What's in there? Except if you made voluntary contribution in 2014, you pumped another $5 grand in there. That is an asset. because that's $5,000 voluntarily placed in your. No, even your monthly contribution comes automatically out of your pay. It's part of your participation in the program, but a number of us want to bump that up, so we take some money that we have discretionary, right? Discretionary money, and we pump, nobody, I don't do it either. But if you did, that would be an asset, right? So you threw in another $2,000. That $2,000 is an asset, but the $250,000 that you've been saving all your life is not. You know what I mean? So there is a distinction there, because that's money you could have put towards your students' education, according to the government. Yes, ma'am. $5,100 approximately, please don't quote me on that, $5,100. If your expected family contribution is more than $5,100, your student will not be eligible for the Pell Grant, because that EFC figure is directly related to Pell eligibility, right? And that's the threshold that determines neediness for that program. So if you have an EFC of $5,200 or $5,500, your kid's probably, well, not probably, is not eligible for the Pell Grant. So that's what that means. Really? Alrighty then. Well, I appreciate your interest and thank you for your questions. Good luck to everyone. Thank you.